The rain drummed against my apartment window as I packed the last of my books into a cardboard box. Each item a memory of the 3 years I'd spent believing I had found my forever family. My hands trembled slightly as I folded my favorite sweater, the one Sarah had complimented countless times, saying how it brought out my eyes. Now, her words from yesterday evening echoed in my mind like a broken record. "You're nothing but a freeloader, Emma. You've been using us, and I'm done pretending otherwise." I had moved in with Sarah and her husband Mark when my own world fell apart. My parents had died in a car accident, leaving me with nothing but grief and a mountain of medical bills from my father's long battle with cancer. Sarah, my best friend since college, had insisted I stay with them while I got back on my feet. According to YouTube analytics, 99% of viewers are not subscribed. That's a huge number. By subscribing the channel that is completely free, you'll help support the channel and never miss fresh content. "That's what family does," she had said, wrapping me in a hug that felt like safety itself. But yesterday, everything changed. The accusation had come out of nowhere during what I thought was a normal dinner conversation. Mark had mentioned that their mortgage payment was increasing, and Sarah had suddenly turned to me with eyes I didn't recognize, cold, calculating, cruel. "Speaking of money," she had said, her voice taking on a tone I'd never heard before, "don't you think it's time Emma started contributing more? I mean, she's been living here rent-free for months now." I had looked up from my plate, confusion written across my face. "Sarah, I've been giving you everything I can. The grocery money, the utilities." "Groceries?" Sarah had laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Emma, that's maybe $200 a month. Do you have any idea what it costs to support another person? The water bill, the electricity, the wear and tear on everything? You're costing us thousands." Mark had shifted uncomfortably in his chair, and I caught him giving Sarah a look I couldn't quite decipher. But she had pressed on, her voice growing louder and more accusatory with each word. "And let's not forget how convenient this all is for you. No job hunting pressure because you've got a free place to stay. No real motivation to rebuild your life because why would you? You've got it made here." The words had hit me like physical blows. I had been working 2 part-time jobs, sending out dozens of resume applications each week and using every spare dollar to pay down my parents' medical debt, a burden I carried alone because I refused to let it fall on anyone else. "That's not fair, Sarah," I had whispered, my voice barely audible. "You know I've been trying." "Trying?" She had stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "Emma, you've been here for 8 months. 8 months of eating our food, using our utilities, sleeping in our guest room. And what do we have to show for it? A friend who's become a financial burden." The silence that followed was deafening. Mark had cleared his throat and mumbled something about checking on something in the garage, leaving us alone. I had sat there, feeling my world crumble for the second time in less than a year. "I think," Sarah had continued, her voice now eerily calm, "it's time for you to find your own place. We need our space back. And honestly, we need to stop enabling your dependency." Now, as I sealed the last box with tape, I reflected on how wrong I had been about the people I thought I knew. The Sarah who had held me while I cried at my parents' funeral seemed like a different person entirely from the one who had systematically dismantled my sense of belonging the night before. I had spent the entire night looking at apartment listings on my phone, calculating and recalculating my meager finances. The cheapest studio I could find would take nearly my entire income from both jobs, leaving almost nothing for food or my parents' medical bills. But I would make it work. I had to. As I carried my boxes to my beat-up Honda Civic, Sarah emerged from the house. She was dressed for work in her expensive business suit, looking every inch the successful marketing executive she had become. For a moment, I thought she might apologize, might acknowledge that her words had been harsh. Instead, she handed me an envelope. "What's this?" I asked, though I dreaded the answer. "A bill," she said matter-of-factly, "for back rent and utilities. I calculated what you should have been paying market rate for the room, minus what you've contributed. It's all itemized." My hand shook as I opened the envelope. The number at the bottom made my stomach drop. $4,200. Sarah, I don't have this kind of money. You know that. Then you shouldn't have taken advantage of our generosity for so long. Her voice was devoid of the warmth I had once associated with her. Consider it a lesson in personal responsibility. I looked at my former best friend, really looked at her, and saw something I had missed before. There was a hardness in her eyes, a satisfaction in my distress that chilled me to the bone. This wasn't about money or fairness. This was about power. And she was enjoying every moment of mine being stripped away. You know what, Sarah? I said quietly, folding the bill and putting it in my pocket. I'll pay you back, every penny. It might take me time, but I will. Something flickered across her face. Surprise, maybe, or disappointment that I hadn't crumbled completely. We'll see, she said, turning to walk back into the house that had once felt like home. As I drove away, I caught a glimpse of Mark in the garage. He raised his hand in what might have been a wave or might have been an apology. I would never know which. The studio apartment I found was in the oldest building in town, with thin walls, a temperamental heater, and a view of the dumpster behind the Chinese restaurant next door. But it was mine, and after the emotional whiplash of the past 24 hours, having a space that no one could take away from me felt like the most precious gift imaginable. I threw myself into work with a desperation born of necessity. I picked up extra shifts at both the coffee shop and the evening cleaning service, working 16-hour days that left me exhausted but solvent. Every spare dollar went toward paying down debt. First my parents' medical bills, then the impossible sum Sarah had demanded. 3 months into my new life, I encountered Mark at the grocery store. He looked uncomfortable when he saw me, glancing around as if hoping Sarah wasn't nearby. "Emma," he said, his voice careful. "How are you doing?" "I'm fine," I replied, which was both true and completely false. I was surviving, which counted as fine in my current vocabulary. "Look, I wanted to say, what happened back then, the way Sarah handled things." He paused, seeming to struggle with his words. It wasn't all her idea. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. "What do you mean?" Mark shifted his weight from foot to foot, unable to meet my eyes. "The money thing, the bill she gave you, that was all her. But asking you to leave, that was—" He swallowed hard. "That was my idea, too." "Why?" The word came out as barely a whisper. "Sarah's pregnant," he said, and the world tilted slightly around me. "We found out a few weeks before we asked you to leave. We're going to need the guest room for a nursery. And the financial pressure with a baby coming—" "You're having a baby," I interrupted, my mind reeling. Sarah, who had always sworn she never wanted children, who had made jokes about how kids would ruin her figure and her career, was pregnant. "Yeah, she's about 4 months along now." Mark finally looked at me, and I saw guilt written across his features. "We could have handled it better. We should have just explained about needing the room instead of what she did." I stood there in the cereal aisle, holding a box of generic cornflakes, trying to process this information. They had kicked me out not because I was a burden, but because they needed the space. Sarah had chosen to make me feel worthless and parasitic, rather than simply explain their situation like adults. "Congratulations," I managed to say, and I meant it despite everything. "I hope you'll both be very happy." Mark's relief was visible. "Thanks, Emma. You always were the bigger person." As I watched him walk away, pushing his cart full of name-brand groceries I couldn't afford, I felt something settle in my chest. Not anger exactly, but a kind of clarity. Sarah had chosen cruelty when honesty would have been kinder and just as effective. She had chosen to wound me rather than trust me with the truth. I continued working my double shifts, continued sending payments to the medical debt collectors and putting aside money for Sarah's bill, but I also began to do something else. I started taking night classes in web development. If I was going to build a new life, I was going to build it properly. 6 months later, I was walking home from my evening job when my phone rang. The number was familiar, Sarah's. "Hello?" I answered, curious despite myself. "Emma." Her voice sounded different, smaller somehow. It's Sarah. I know. How are you? There was a long pause. I'm. Things are complicated right now. Look, I was wondering if we could meet for coffee sometime. There are some things I need to talk to you about. I almost said yes automatically, the old habit of accommodating Sarah's needs still strong after all these months, but something stopped me. I'm pretty busy these days, I said instead. Between work and school, I don't have much free time. School? She sounded surprised. I'm taking programming classes, trying to build a career that's more stable. That's great, Emma. Really. Another pause. The reason I'm calling, though, is that I could really use a friend right now. Things with Mark and the baby. It's been harder than I expected. I felt a familiar tug of sympathy, the old Emma wanting to rush to Sarah's aid, but I remembered her face when she'd handed me that bill, the satisfaction in her eyes when she'd called me a freeloader. I'm sorry you're going through a difficult time, I said carefully, but I think you probably have other friends who would be better suited to help you right now. The silence stretched between us, and I could practically hear Sarah processing the fact that I wasn't going to drop everything to support her. Emma, look, I know things ended badly between us, but… Sarah, I interrupted gently, I need to go. I have class tonight. After I hung up, I sat in my tiny apartment and marveled at how different I felt. 6 months ago, that conversation would have ended with me agreeing to meet her, probably offering to help with whatever was troubling her. But something fundamental had shifted in me during those months of independence. The programming classes were paying off in ways I hadn't expected. Not only was I learning valuable skills, but I was meeting other people who were rebuilding their lives, people who understood struggle without judging it. My instructor, a woman named Janet who had switched careers after her divorce, had become something of a mentor. You have a natural aptitude for this, she told me one evening after class. Have you thought about applying for internships? I know several companies that specifically recruit from our program. The idea of a career change, of leaving behind the exhausting cycle of multiple part-time jobs, felt like a fantasy too good to be true. But Janet helped me put together a portfolio, and within 3 weeks, I had landed an internship at a small tech startup downtown. The internship was unpaid, but it offered something more valuable than money, the possibility of a different future. I continued working my evening cleaning job to pay the bills, but now I spent my days learning about database management and user interface design instead of making countless lattes for impatient customers. It was during my second month at the internship that I received another call from Sarah. This time, she was crying. "Emma, please," she said between sobs. I know I don't deserve to ask, but I don't know who else to turn to. Despite everything, hearing her cry activated every protective instinct I had. "What's wrong? It's Mark," she said. "He's been having an affair. I found out yesterday, and he moved out. He says he can't handle the pressure of the baby, and he's been seeing someone from his office." I closed my eyes, feeling the familiar weight of someone else's crisis settling on my shoulders. "Sarah, I'm so sorry. That's terrible. I'm 6 months pregnant, and I can't afford the mortgage on my own," she continued. "My job is probably gone too. They've been laying people off, and being pregnant makes me an easy target even though they can't say that's why." The irony wasn't lost on me. Sarah, who had accused me of being financially dependent, was now in the same position she had condemned me for. "What do you need from me?" I asked, though I dreaded the answer. I was wondering, I know this is a lot to ask, but could you maybe move back in, just temporarily, until I figure things out? You could have your old room back, and we could split expenses like we should have done before. I felt something inside me go very still. She was asking me to rescue her from the exact situation she had condemned me for being in. "Sarah," I said slowly, "6 months ago, you called me a freeloader. You made me feel like I was taking advantage of your generosity. Now you want me to move back in?" "That was different," she said quickly. "You didn't have anywhere else to go, but I do have options. I'm trying to explore all possibilities." "What options do you have?" I asked. The pause that followed told me everything I needed to know. She was desperate, with nowhere to turn, and I was her last hope. "Emma, I know I handled things badly before. I was stressed about the pregnancy and scared about money, and I took it out on you. I'm sorry." It was the apology I had wanted months ago, but now it felt hollow, motivated by need rather than genuine remorse. "I appreciate the apology," I said, "but I can't move back in." "Why not?" Her voice had a sharp edge now, the old entitlement creeping back in. "Because I've built a life here. I have my internship, my classes, my own place. I'm finally stable. But I need help," she said, as if that trumped everything else. "I understand that. But me moving back in wouldn't solve your problems, Sarah. It would just make us both dependent on an unstable situation." What I didn't say was that I had learned something important about myself during those months of struggle. I was stronger than I had ever imagined. I could handle disappointment, financial pressure, and loneliness without losing myself. Moving back into Sarah's orbit would mean giving up that hard-won strength. "So you're just going to abandon me?" she asked, and I heard an echo of the manipulative tone that had become so familiar. "I'm not abandoning you. I'm maintaining boundaries that are healthy for both of us." After I hung up, I sat in my tiny apartment and felt something I hadn't experienced in months: peace. For the first time since my parents died, I had been presented with someone else's crisis and chosen not to absorb it as my own. 2 weeks later, Janet approached me with news that would change everything. "Emma, the company wants to offer you a full-time position," she said, barely able to contain her excitement. "It comes with health benefits, a decent salary, and most importantly, room for advancement." The salary she quoted was more than I had made working both part-time jobs combined. For the first time in over a year, I would be able to live without constantly calculating whether I could afford groceries. I accepted the position immediately, and as I walked home that evening, I felt a lightness I had almost forgotten existed. Not only was I financially stable, but I was building a career in something I genuinely enjoyed. It was around this time that I began hearing through mutual acquaintances about Sarah's deteriorating situation. Mark's affair had become public knowledge, and the divorce was contentious. Sarah's job had indeed been eliminated during a round of layoffs, and she was struggling to find new employment while visibly pregnant. I felt sympathy for her situation, but it was a distant kind of compassion, like feeling sorry for a character in a sad movie. Her problems no longer felt like emergencies I needed to solve. Then, 3 months into my new job, Sarah showed up at my apartment. I opened the door to find her standing in the hallway, 7 months pregnant, and looking exhausted. The expensive suits had been replaced by discount store maternity wear, and her usually perfect hair hung limply around her shoulders. "Hi," she said, attempting a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Sarah, what are you doing here?" "I was hoping we could talk." She gestured toward her belly. "This is getting harder, and I could really use a friend." I stepped aside to let her in, noting how her eyes took in the small space that had become home to me. It was still tiny, but I had made it comfortable with secondhand furniture and plants from the grocery store clearance rack. "You've made it nice in here," she said, settling carefully onto my thrift store couch. "Thank you. Can I get you some water?" "That would be great." She watched me move around the little kitchenette. "Emma, I need to ask you something, and I hope you'll hear me out." I handed her the water and sat across from her in the single chair that constituted my living room furniture. "I'm losing the house," she said without preamble. "I can't make the mortgage payments alone, and Mark is fighting the support payments. My lawyer says it could be months before we get a settlement." I nodded, unsurprised by this development. "The thing is," she continued, "I was wondering if you might consider lending me some money, just to get through the next few months until the divorce is settled." The request hung in the air between us like a toxic cloud. This was the same woman who had accused me of financial parasitism, who had demanded back payment for rent I had never agreed to pay. "How much money?" I asked. "Maybe 5,000. I know it's a lot, but—" "Sarah," I interrupted, "$5,000 is more than I make in 2 months. But you're working now, and you don't have the same expenses I do. You could probably swing it if you really wanted to help." The entitled assumption in her words was breathtaking. She had somehow decided that my financial stability existed for her benefit. Even if I had that kind of money to spare, which I don't, I'm curious why you think I would lend it to you. She looked genuinely confused by the question. Because we're friends. Because you know I would pay you back once everything is settled. Are we friends, Sarah? I asked quietly. Because friends don't usually accuse each other of being freeloaders. Friends don't hand each other bills for back rent that was never agreed to. Her face flushed. I explained that I was stressed and handled things badly. You told me I was using you. You made me feel like a parasite for accepting help during the worst time of my life. My voice remained calm, but I felt years of suppressed hurt rising to the surface. And now you want me to give you exactly the kind of help you condemn me for needing. That's different, she said, echoing her earlier phone call. I'm not asking to move in with you. I'm asking for a loan. It's not different, Sarah. You need financial help just like I did. The only difference is that when I needed help, I contributed what I could and was grateful for what I received. You're asking me to solve your problems while offering nothing in return except the promise of eventual repayment. She stared at me as if I had transformed into someone unrecognizable. Perhaps I had. So, you're saying no? She asked. I'm saying no. Sarah struggled to her feet, her movements awkward with the weight of late pregnancy. I can't believe you're being so selfish. After everything Mark and I did for you. The accusation of selfishness almost made me laugh. What you did for me was offer help, and then use it as a weapon against me when it became inconvenient. I learned from that experience. What's that supposed to mean? It means I learned not to confuse genuine generosity with conditional assistance, and I learned not to offer help I can't afford to give. She stood there for a moment, perhaps waiting for me to change my mind or offer some smaller amount. When I remained silent, she walked to the door. You know, she said, turning back one final time. I used to think you were a good person, but you've become cold. I've become self-sufficient. I replied, There's a difference. After she left, I sat in my quiet apartment and marveled at how different that conversation had felt from our previous encounters. I had stated my boundaries clearly and stuck to them without anger or cruelty. I had learned to separate compassion from compulsion, to feel sorry for someone without feeling responsible for fixing their problems. The months that followed brought news of Sarah's continuing struggles through the small town gossip network. She had lost the house and moved into a subsidized apartment across town. The baby, a little girl, was born healthy, but premiums for single mothers were challenging on unemployment benefits alone. Mark's support payments were minimal and often late. I felt genuinely sorry for her situation, particularly for the innocent child caught in the middle of adult failures, but I also recognized that these were consequences of choices. Mark's choice to have an affair, Sarah's choice to handle conflict with cruelty, both of their choices to live beyond their means while married. My own life continued to improve in ways both large and small. The tech company promoted me within 6 months, and I was able to move to a larger apartment with actual windows that looked out on something other than a dumpster. I had paid off my parents' medical debts and was even able to start a small savings account. More importantly, I had rebuilt my sense of self. The woman who had left Sarah's house in shame and confusion was gone, replaced by someone who knew her own worth and wouldn't compromise it for the comfort of others. It was almost a year later when I encountered Sarah at the grocery store. She was pushing a cart with a toddler strapped into the seat, a beautiful little girl with dark curls and serious eyes. Sarah looked tired but not desperate, and she was wearing scrubs that suggested she had found work. Emma, she said when she noticed me. Her voice was cautious but not hostile. Hi, Sarah. This must be your daughter. She's beautiful. Thank you. Sarah's hand instinctively went to the child's head, smoothing her curls. Her name is Lily. We stood there for a moment, in the awkward dance of former friends who have hurt each other. I heard you got a job at the hospital, I said. Yeah, I'm working as a medical assistant. It's not what I used to do, but it's steady work with good benefits. She paused. I heard you're doing well too. Programming, right? Yes, I like it. Another pause, longer this time. Emma, she said finally, I owe you an apology. A real one, not the kind I gave you when I needed something. I waited, genuinely curious to hear what she would say. The way I treated you when you were living with us, it was wrong. You weren't a freeloader. You were a friend who needed help. And instead of supporting you, I made you feel worthless. She took a breath. I think I was scared of how much responsibility Mark and I had taken on, and it was easier to blame you than to admit we were in over our heads too. The apology was better than I had expected, more honest than anything she had said during our previous encounters. Thank you for saying that, I replied. It means something to hear you acknowledge it. I also want you to know that I understand why you couldn't help me when I asked. I put you in an impossible position after treating you so badly. Little Lily chose that moment to drop her sippy cup, and I bent to retrieve it before Sarah could manage it with the cart. As I handed it back to the toddler, she smiled at me, a guileless, innocent expression that reminded me why I had always wanted to help people in the first place. She's really beautiful, Sarah. You're lucky. I am, she agreed, and for the first time in our conversation, her smile was genuine. Being her mother is the hardest thing I've ever done, but also the best. We parted ways cordially, both of us understanding that too much had passed between us for real, friendship to be rebuilt, but that the worst of the anger and hurt had finally been laid to rest. As I drove home, I reflected on the strange turns life had taken. Sarah, who had once seemed to have everything figured out, had lost her marriage, her career, and her financial security. But she had gained something too: humility, resilience, and apparently a capacity for genuine love that I had never seen in her before. I had lost my sense of security and my closest friendship, but I had gained something more valuable: an unshakable knowledge of my own strength and worth. The woman who had packed her belongings in shame and confusion 2 years earlier would barely recognize the person I had become. That evening, I sat in my comfortable apartment, not luxurious, but truly mine, and marveled at the unpredictable nature of justice. I had never sought revenge against Sarah for her cruelty. I had simply focused on building a life I could be proud of. And somehow, without any effort on my part, the universe had provided both of us with exactly the lessons we needed to learn. Sarah had learned that financial security can disappear overnight, that pride comes before a fall, and that the help of others is a gift to be treasured, not a weakness to be scorned. I had learned that I was capable of standing on my own, that boundaries are essential for healthy relationships, and that sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone is refuse to enable their poor choices. The rain that had been drumming against my window on that awful day when I packed my belongings had eventually stopped. The sun had come out, as it always does, and I had learned to appreciate both the storms and the clear skies that followed. I never did pay Sarah that $4,000 she had demanded, and she never asked for it again.